You are listening to Wicked Psychotherapists, a podcast where two psychotherapists show you that taking care of and learning about mental health doesn't have to be wicked hot.
Hey everyone, this is Tanya.
Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Wicked Psychotherapists.
Today we have a really interesting movie to look at. This is I would say a classic movie. It's from 1986. It's got a lot of young stars in it and a lot of course, mental health themes that we'll be talking about. This is something that we thought, and we were suggested this by someone who I think we're going to give a shout out to at the end. This is a great suggestion because there's so much that we can talk about in this. There's so many characters looking back where we, I think, can really maybe relate to them, but also just remember these actors. I mean, these are some pretty iconic ones. But the movie is Stand By Me from 1986. So in talking about this is kind of a unique movie in and of itself because it talks about coming of age themes, friendships, adolescence, but it comes from a very famous horror writer that Erin's mom was pretty well acquainted with, Stephen King.
Yes, we learned in previous episodes my mom was obsessed with horror and Stephen King.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting because it was adapted from this novella that Stephen King had written, but it was directed by Rob Reiner, who is, if you know him from the 80s, 90s, he's the feel-good director, family kind of writing. And so that's an interesting combination right there. I wanted to first kind of open up and talk about some of the things that makes this movie enduring as a classic. What do you think in terms of the actors and the setting, the themes? What do you think makes this something that continues to give us, we want to watch it again and again?
Well, I think it's probably the idea of those friendships, like the deep friendships of the four of them and how they're able to connect, even though on the surface they all seem very different, but they have their own family trauma or issues. And I think just knowing that they're going to go on this adventure, whatever it is, and whatever might happen is kind of exciting and probably gets people to watch it again and again, or just discover it now and enjoy it. It had been many, many years since I've seen it. So I had to rewatch, and rewatching it, I was like, oh yeah, I remember because I'd seen it so many times before. I was like, oh, okay. I'm having the feelings again of how I felt when I watched it. But I do think people, it's, of course there's the nostalgia for people who grew up watching it, maybe not in the 50s when it came, but for people maybe in the, 80s, 90s watching it and growing up with it, there might be a lot of nostalgia.
Yeah, like that was definitely a time. Yeah, because the movie itself is set in 1959, but it was released in 1986. So, some people who maybe have of that age set, but also I think there's, like you said, there's so many universal elements of growing up, having friendships around that age, 12, it's right before you kind of set off into middle school and things really start to change. And you have those solid cemented friendships that maybe start to evolve or start to grow apart. And so I think people really can relate to that watching it, as well as just the elements of, four very different people, kids coming together, but all having some form of trauma or difficulties that they can kind of tease themselves and tease each other about. But for the most part, they are, especially the two main characters who are the good friends, Gordy and Chris, or Wil Wheaton and River Phoenix. So it really, I think, is something that shows the enduring nature of why friendships are so important at this age and how friendships can be the thing that support you when you don't have maybe the family that can, or you don't have the community that supports you. Like Chris, everybody thinks that his family is bad, and so they assume that he's bad.
Yeah, he seems to be the one, besides Gordy, that just so empathetic, and Chris seems so in touch with what's going on. He is very stereotyped of what everyone expects him to be, the bad kid, because family gets in trouble. So they assume anything bad that happens, Chris has done it.
Yeah, they talk about that instance where Gordy's father calls him a thief because I guess Chris had stolen some lunch money at school. And in one scene, Chris gets really upset and is like, they didn't even ask me. And his friend Gordy is like, well, did you do it? And he was like, well, yeah. But he's basically pointing to the fact that they just assumed it. It just went along with the narrative. And then he also goes into a story about, well, I went and I gave it back. I gave back the entire amount. And then they said they never got it back. And the person, the old lady, I guess that's the teacher that he gave it back to. Had it. And so she was, like he was held responsible, but she wasn't. She went and spent that money, which was wrong. And, just kind of, I think you really see the unfairness of like power dynamics when you're looked at as, kind of a low on the totem pole in a community and looked at as kind of like maybe trash or maybe as bad news.
And even though he sees things that are not fair, and where he sees like his teacher or someone ended up spending all of the money that he gave back and he knows it's wrong, but nobody would believe him because of his reputation.
Yeah. Or his family's reputation.
Right.
He's really
he's probably inherited that reputation, which that happens a lot, where people are like, oh, you're so-and-so's sibling or you're that, where it's like, I didn't do anything.
Yeah, and that's kind of the feeling I get is that up until maybe that lunch money incident, it doesn't seem like he really had, I don't know, they don't really talk about it, but when people start to treat you, like you are something, then it's just easier to become it because it's like, well, they don't think anything of me anyways. I could be trying my hardest and they're still looking at these other things that are maybe not so positive. So it's almost like you feel like you don't have a chance.
Yeah, the self-fulfilling prophecy. Because, well, everyone's saying it's true. It might have, then it might as well just act on it.
Yeah. And I think that's probably what he felt because he actually showed that he felt bad about it and that he had remorse and he returned it. However, he didn't get any credit for that. Right. So it just kind of shows like, oh, the teachers probably thought, well, they're not going to believe he brought it back anyways. And I can use this for my own good. And he just kind of feels like, wow, like, what do I do? Nobody can ever see outside of this or who I am.
Right.
He's just a very interesting character. And that Chris's dad drinks and probably mistreats him and his brother Eyeball. And that Eyeball also with his gang of friends, including like Ace and the older kids, treat him like crap. And there's Eyeball, his older brother. He doesn't protect him. He just like kind of encourages it and is like, kind of goes along with it. Like he doesn't care. So there really isn't any support there. But his friends provide that support, namely Gordy, his good friend who's very aware of things. And, on the other side of things, Chris really supports Gordy too. He's always telling him like, hey, your old man, you think he hates you, but he doesn't see you. He doesn't see the great person I see. I'll support you. His dad is neglectful towards him because he doesn't see him as the kid that he wants. Instead, his older brother who died in a car accident, Denny, he would have preferred to have kind of relates more to him. And he's very cold to Gordy.
Yeah, and Gordy gets forgotten and gets ignored after his brother passes away. And you never really tell if like the family really says it or this is just in Gordy's imagination that the dad's like, it should have been you. It's a lot of grief that's unspoken because it sounds like Gordy's not really recognized because he's the sibling, and sibling loss, it's oftentimes ignored. Where it's like people will pay attention to the parents who have lost a child. So Gordy's grieving and trying to process the loss of his older brother alone, basically.
Yeah. And Chris really sees that in him and says like, hey, you got talent. You're going to be like a famous writer. The dad doesn't seem too interested in reading his stories. He was more, when his brother was alive, then he was like talking about his football career because he's a big football star. Yeah. So he, there was no real space for him to process that. So I think he probably was feeling things along the way, like in that dream he had about his father saying it should have been you. Yeah. We don't know if he actually said that or not, but it wouldn't seem too far off from the way he kind of gets treated, but we don't know if that actually happened. I mean, in the movie. Yeah. But yeah, there's some great moments too. I think this whole movie is it's based around this kind of adventure where they're very curious and it has a very adult theme, like a kid their age dying, right? And seeing a dead body and they're walking this long way. And there's some symbolism to the train tracks being like the way of how adolescence slowly becomes adulthood, right? And how quick adolescence is, if you really kind of want to look at it in that diva realm. But then the other characters, Teddy and Vern, are interesting and kind of funny, but they also have their own stuff going on for sure.
Yeah.
Teddy's, obviously got his father is known for bouts of rage. Sounds like his dad was a veteran, maybe has some PTSD and is in a mental health hospital.
Yeah.
And Teddy's kind of always acting out being a soldier because he admires his dad, but he also doesn't really know how to process that his dad abused him.
Yeah. Like his ears.
That anger.
Yeah. Like even like he has physical reminders all the time, like his ear. And, it's probably difficult for him to really think of all the abuse that he's endured. But yeah, he wants to be like his father. He probably sees him as his hero. It's probably very difficult, for him having his father who he admires, but also is his abuser. When he's locked away because of PTSD or whatever has happened to him at that time.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. And, I do find it really it's so nice to see, though, how his friends do support him. Like at the junkyard, the owner starts saying, I know who you are. Your dad's locked up in the loony bin, and starts kind of mocking him because he's angry that he was in his yard and got his dog all upset. And then his friends are like, hey, and they're, kind of saying some nasty things back to the guy. But they're sticking up for him, right? And they're basically kind of like holding him back, like, don't do anything. So there is a supportive dynamic there, and they do have a good friendship. You can see that they have a good, kind of, I think, support built in place. And then there is Vern, who seems to be a little more squeamish maybe than the other ones. He's a little more afraid of things. Maybe kind of the baby of the group, and I mean that by like kind of the youngest, kind of the least experienced.
Yeah, he seems a lot more immature. I mean, they're all immature because they're only 12, but he seems like the youngest as far as just, it's fine because again, they are just children at that age, but he does seem very either emotionally immature or something. It's interesting too, because I don't know if he came from an abusive family or a supportive family, but he's probably been bullied by a lot of people around him just because he struggles a little bit.
Yeah. And people like poke at him and call him, make fun of things about his weight and his appearance and things. And I do think that it's interesting to me because this is kind of just, outside of the movie, but I went down a little bit of a research rabbit hole with looking at the actors who played them, these boys, and River Phoenix is like probably about 15 at the time of filming. And Jerry O'Connell, is that his name? Jerry O'Connell, Jerry O'Connell is by far the youngest. He's like 11, maybe 12 at that time. It doesn't sound like a big difference, but it kind of is. And then the other two are like in between, like, 13 and 14 kind of thing. So they are kind of in different stages, but they do have a really good bond together. You can see like a good chemistry, especially River Phoenix and Wil Wheaton with their close friendship on screen. They really do seem to get along. I kind of wonder if that played into the way the movie came out. And I think this movie, we can't not mention, I mean, the iconicity, I don't know if that's a word, but I'm going to use it, the iconicity of some of these actors. I mean, River Phoenix, okay, who also died young, which was something that happened in the movie, which is so freaky to me and gives me like kind of like goosebumps sometimes when I think of that. And Jerry O'Connell and Corey Feldman, who was just absolutely like him and Corey Haim were the two Coreys, right? Who, unfortunately, Corey Haim is no longer here. Yeah. And Wil Wheaton, who went on to in Star Trek. Yeah. So there's some very kind of, big names. And then John Cusack is Rory's older brother. Like, oof, adorable.
Yeah, Say Anything and all the great things that he was in. And then Kiefer Sutherland. A lot of really big name actors in this.
And also the guy who plays Gordy, Richard Pryor. He's huge actor who plays
Richard Dreyfuss.
Gordy as an adult. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I say Richard Pryor? Richard Dreyfuss. Okay. Yeah. You understood me.
Just a little difference.
A little bit of a difference there, but same difference. No, not really. Richard Dreyfuss. I mean, like he's a big name. He was definitely very, very big, especially around that time. I think still is a pretty big name.
Sure he is.
But I think that is another part of, this was like kind of at the beginning of their stardom. I think a lot of people do like movies where they can see like, oh, these are kind of where they got their start, kind of like the movie The Outsiders. That is jam-packed and loaded with people.
That is a great movie.
Yeah. Cruise.
Yeah.
Dylan. Rob Lowe. Emilio Estevez.
Thomas E. Howell.
Diane Lane. Oh,
yeah.
Her. So many people. I think that's also another part that really makes it unique. And, the bond that it seems like they had a good kind of like, they teased each other, but it was all in good fun. They actually would help each other out if it came down to it. Like, and we see that in the scene when Ace and his gang come and try to commandeer the body for some reason, something that would make them seem like heroes.
Yeah. All of a sudden, Gordy comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
With the, he's like, no, you're not taking it. And then it's also, it seems like Gordy in their group, they just wanted, it almost seemed like, we want to bring the body home and like, show people. But it's also like, they're like, let's make a stretcher and let's, do it right. Like sound like they're like going to take care of him and like try to be respectful to bring it back. And then here's these, idiot older brothers coming and just like, all right, we're going to, because who knows what they had plans for. Maybe they thought they'd make money or fame or something or.
Yeah, they definitely wanted it for their own benefit. And I think the younger boys kind of were thinking like, oh, we would get some fame, then we won't be like so unknown and invisible.
Right.
We won't be like kind of quote unquote the losers, right?
Yeah, people will take us seriously.
They were definitely overshadowed by 3 of the 4 in different ways with Gordy with their older brothers, right? We don't know about Teddy, but there was kind of this overshadowing, and they ended up choosing to say, hey, we end up making an anonymous phone call. We didn't even want that. We just wanted it to be okay.
We don't need the notoriety.
Yeah, which I thought was so telling of their character, just like all their characters, like it was, really, really good. And it doesn't seem like they really put up a fight about that. They just kind of all came to that consensus. They were like, yeah, this is a good way. But yeah, I just think it's such a, when I look back and I look at some of the symbolism, and of course I read about this on like, different articles, like what the symbolism is. And it's just like, I did not see this. And I don't necessarily think it's all true or that I see it that way, but some of it I'm like, oh yeah, this was really such a cool way to represent that. I didn't see that when I was younger watching this. I can remember watching this probably in the like late 80s, early 90s. It would have been like, I don't know, 7 or something, like 8. And it would play over and over again. So I'd watch it and I liked it, but then I didn't watch it again.
I'm about the same age as the boys, like were. So I was like probably like 10 or 11, I think, if I'm doing my math right, when the movie came out. So I was about the same age. So I think I was like, oh my gosh, they're so cute. Yeah. So I think that's what drew me to it too, is just, watching that. These child actors, I think I was telling you too, that's around the time, I think Lost Boys probably came out a few years later, but Kiefer Sutherland was like this bad boy type of vibe too. And it was like, oh, he's so cute, So I think that also, so I don't know if I was really looking for the symbolism. I just remember thinking like, okay, they're going on. I don't even think I remembered or like how impactful it was that Gordy's brother died. I think I was just more focused on they're going on this trip and they're really brave going on the train tracks where the kid was killed. And because I just remember that one scene where they're over the bridge and they're trying to almost outrun the train. And I just remember always that being like so scary and, like, how are they going to get off? Are they going to get off? Are they going to die? So I just remember thinking that and rewatching that. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this was really suspenseful and what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I don't think anybody really thinks about symbolism probably until maybe college classes.
Right.
So I don't know that. I was just seeing it for like the elements of it and being like, oh, like, yeah, the train scene is so iconic. Oh my gosh.
Because it is. What's going to happen? Then like, like even at the very, very last second, you're like, oh, phew, and all right, they're okay. It's just, there's a lot of scenes, like I mentioned to you, like the whole, like the lard ass scene where, where it is just a story and it's neat too, because and also what I like about it, not the story, because the story is really gross, but I do like that the boys really understand what Gordy's craft is. And they really are encouraging Gordy to be creative and be artistic. And they're like, hey, Gordy, why don't you tell us a story? Why don't you let us, so instead of being like, oh my gosh, that's so boring. Why are you telling us another story? But they actually are encouraging, because he's probably told them like, hey guys, I really like creative writing. I want to be a writer when I become a grown up or whatever. And so they really encourage him, and they're like, do you got any new ones? And he's like, yeah, I do. And then they really listen. And I like too that they really listen, and then they ask questions about it. What about this? I didn't understand this. So instead of just not really paying attention or waiting for their turn, they listen to this whole story about this person who was getting fat shamed, and then decided to basically like, hey, show the whole town. Don't pick on me. Just, but in a really gross way.
Yeah, that's true. It was it was gross. And it was just so hard to hear them, like, everybody saying that. But I think I love that part, that they were very supportive of Gordy's talents. And also that he took the point of view of like, hey, this is someone who is having something done wrong to him, like he wasn't, and I think around that time when it was, the movie was set in 1959, where there were the values of, there was a lot of things that were said, a lot of words that were used, and even just, what they called him would just not be okay now.
Well, and also I think now, but not as much as it was probably back then, it's very, very important to be thin and be perceived a certain way. So, and I think that also, like thin equals health, like that's, like would you always hear, in the 50s, 60s, probably 70s and stuff. And so having everyone chant lard ass, to this person who you're like, oh, what are you like? And the adults taunting this person. It's horrible. Like when you think about it, like if it really happened, I know it was a story that Gordy was telling that was in a movie. So like, it's not real, but it is just sad thinking about that. Like, like that could happen and people do get bullied like that. But it's also interesting to me that Gordy is someone who we said was getting ignored and gets bullied by older brothers in the area, and he's ignored by his own family. So he probably felt something like that, ostracized.
Yeah, he could relate to it. Yeah. And, Chris, I think really when he's comforting him, and a later scene when he's kind of breaking down at the body and he's like, hey, you're going to be an amazing writer, and maybe you can even write about us. Like Chris really sees like, hey, he really takes these things in deep. These things are important to him. He can see who he is as a person, deep down to his core, which is something his dad can't appreciate. And his mom is kind of just lost in her own grief.
Yeah.
Can't even respond.
Yeah, she's probably just on some sort of medication or something, just zoned out, just not even recognizing that she has a second son.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it is interesting because, and maybe again, this is the time, but they were gone for the whole weekend and they didn't tell their parents where they were going.
Yeah.
Like,
I thought that was, it's just like, we just have our bags rolled and and just have, whatever money they have. And I like that too, that they didn't even think to pack food. And I like how Vern is like, all right, what are we going to eat? Here's my 7 cents.
He's like, what? And then he is like talking about later on when Gordy gets some stuff. He's like, you could have gotten some of this or some of that. He's like, oh yeah, well, I'll make sure to do that with your 7 cents there, Vern.
Thanks for chipping in.
I like it. I like the phrases. They're very authentic. At least I think. I'm not sure. Neither one of us were around at that time, and I'm not an expert of the late 50s, but they say, give me some skin or whatever, instead of high five kind of thing. It sounded authentic to me.
Probably was. I'm sure they probably did some research,
sure. And like the outfits and everything.
Really, I was wondering where it was filmed because it just looked like such a, like going there. It's like, it seems like such great woods to walk through, like, and just all of like the whole scenes and everything were just really, really nice.
I don't know what it was, but I know the movie was supposed to be set in Castle Rock, Oregon.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Northwest.
Yeah, it did.
I wonder if it was like a part of California or what it was, because yeah, it did look like a really cool place for like walking and
Yeah, finding dead bodies.
but
No,
yeah,
just kidding.
I'm curious about that. Oh, I was looking it up because I'm like, I am really curious about that. Oh,
Yeah.
it was filmed in Oregon.
Huh.
Okay,
Well,
so
that's
I guess
nice.
they were pretty authentic.
That's really neat that they did that. Yeah, I think it's a really good movie. And I think parts of it, like the leeches part and the pie eating contest, I'm like cringy, both of them. But they're both there for a reason, too. I think the leeches is like, all right, well, let's just go in. Oh, the water's not that deep. Then they fall in and it's so deep. And then there's like slushing together, and they're helping each other out. They're struggling. Then they're having fun. They're playing. And it kind of breaks up the seriousness that they've been having for a while. And then they're like, oh my gosh, leeches. And, then Gordy finds one, and he passes out after he takes it off. And what I like too is they all just stop and like, oh my gosh, is he okay? Instead of like, oh my gosh, you're
Yeah,
such
they
a
help him.
Yeah.
They don't like make fun of him. I was like, oh, they do help him. Okay. So they're
Yeah.
really good friends.
Yeah, they are good friends because some people would be like, oh, I'm in it for myself. Let me just worry about mine. Let me just take mine off and just.
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, wait, he just passed out. That's a big deal. Let's take care of him.
And then he's kind of, Gordy after that is a little irritable because he's just like, oh God, you guys are still fighting. You guys are still acting like kids, like just cut it out. Let's just go kind of thing.
Mhm.
Like he's kind of had his fill of like, oh, like I feel that something has just been too much for me.
And I think that's so unexpected from him because he seems very, he seems kind of inward a lot and quiet. And so when he screams at them to like, cut it out. Okay. We're, stop it. That they're like, whoa, this is serious. Let's just stop and we're friends and let's get going. And, like stop the crap.
Yeah. And I mean, it was a really great movie. The ending always just kills me.
Yeah. It sounded like after the trip, Teddy and Vern just stopped being friends with him, or maybe they just found out their interest or something like that. And then
it just kind of went on separate paths.
And that happens. I know friends I had in middle school, I kept some throughout high school, but a lot went to different schools or we got different friends. That happens. It's nice that he and Chris stayed friends. And it sounded like they were still best friends. They lost contact for like a year before Chris passed away. But it's was really nice to see that, Chris became a lawyer, then Gordy became a writer. So they both probably defied the odds of what their family expected them to become or what other people did too.
Yeah. And Chris actually, I mean, at first he was kind of insistent, like, no, I'm not going to try for those higher level classes. But like Gordy really encouraged him and he really worked at it and he overcame and, became a lawyer. And it's unfortunate he, ended up getting stabbed and killed by like doing something that he thought was the right thing, breaking up like a fight, and kind of actually doing something that was pretty noble and, putting others first. And so it kind of really showed his character up until the end.
Right.
And then you see him disappear, like when they're showing the kids saying goodbye. And that's, it breaks your heart because, the actor River Phoenix actually died pretty young.
Yeah.
That to me is really heartbreaking and gives me goosebumps every time.
Yeah.
This is definitely a great movie about coming of age, but also how friendships are and things that really define us at certain moments. Even though it may have just been a moment, it really can stick with you forever because of certain themes and certain times. The way you really need people at those points because maybe family can't provide it, or maybe people who are your own age who are going through similar things are the only ones that can really give you that support.
Right. And I just saw something because I was curious. I guess, it says like Stephen King, Stand By Me was like Stephen King's best work, he said, that he's ever made. And it also was an autobiographical story based kind of around his, like probably not super true, but based around his childhood and friendships. And Gordy was he kind of felt like Gordy a little bit,
I know he had said that like he grew up in a very small, like in Maine or something, like he grew up in a very small, and he said that there was a boy who got hit by a train when they were like 4 or something. I didn't realize the friendship part of it. Like he understood that. Oh, so that's interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, this was really good. This episode was actually suggested to us by one of our avid listeners. If you wanted to talk a little more on that.
So
we wanted to give a shout out.
Yeah, of course. So we have quite a few listeners, and some people send fan mail, and one of our listeners, Paul Duran. I actually had the privilege of working with Paul, oh gosh, years ago. We used to work at a nonprofit together, and then we saw each other again at a different nonprofit I was working with. So it was always nice to see Paul and run into him. But Paul suggested in our fan mail that we should do, because we talked about our love of Stephen King and different things, and we love movies since we're Siskel and Ebert. Paul mentioned, why don't you do Stand By Me? So it's great, and it's a great movie. And also, Paul is a author. So speaking of Stephen King and speaking of authors, Paul has recently written a book called The Foster Pup. I'm going to hang it up. I'm hold it up, not hang it up.
Cute.
And it's a really cute children's book about fostering dogs. And one little dog, Weenut, here's a little picture of Weenut, ends up in a foster, living with Paul's family and the dogs. And then he ends up getting adopted by one of Paul's children. So it's just really the importance of fostering dogs and adopting dogs. And it's just a really nice story. So I just wanted to give a shout out. The name of the book is The Foster Pup, and it's written by Paul Duran. And you can find it on Amazon or anything. But I just wanted to thank Paul for the suggestion for Stand By Me and his cute book.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks so much, Paul. Sounds like you've had some really great suggestions, and you've let us, about some things that you've encouraged us, and that book looks amazing.
Really cute.
Yeah, so thanks very much. We always love, if you want to shout out, or if you just want to suggest something and you don't want to shout out, that's fine too. But we're always looking for recommendations. We always appreciate anything anybody can offer us that we can work on. But yeah, don't forget to follow us on our socials at Wicked Psychotherapists. It's Instagram. Facebook is the Wicked Psychotherapists. And listen, write us a review. It helps us out a lot.
We do read them.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do. Definitely do. Very important to us. And don't forget, stay wicked.
And keep your mind well. All right. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Guys, take care.